As we navigate this crazy world, we must search for the truth. Then we can discover and empower ourselves to live as a free individual. Join Tammy on Journey for Truth.
Hello and welcome to Journey for Truth on iHeartRadio and YouTube. I am Tammy Urbanic, your host. It has been 3 years since we've had our last show, and it was time to get back on track. I would like to introduce our next guest, John Tanner. He was the principal in a school district in Texas. He and some other educators were accused of fraud. They were formally charged and arrested. And I would love to talk with John about exactly what happened, who was innocent, who wasn't, and everything that went down. John, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful for being here.
Let's begin with what you and the other educators were accused of specifically.
That's a good question. We got accused. We had basically 4 charges against us. The 3 were having to do with fraud against the U.S., mail fraud, electronic fraud, and then the last one had to deal with retaliation against 2 teachers. When asking what was the fraud about, I can honestly tell you we've been in this for over a decade. Finally, the whole nightmare ended in January of this year, 2020. And I can still tell you, after going through all of it, going through the trial with all the charges dropped, with everything, I can't tell you what those charges meant or what it was that we actually did to break the law. It is, it's that convoluted.
Wow.
And it's why the charges were ultimately dropped. I mean, we refuse to say we did anything wrong, and usually the way the government likes to do things, and what I mean by government, FBI, DOJ, is that they like to scare people into plea deals to say that they can get a conviction rate, and we just wouldn't do it. We knew we had done nothing wrong and couldn't even understand the charges that were against us.
So you, didn't you have lawyers who could explain what the charges were for?
That very good question, and we had actually quite a few lawyers over the course of it. I had 3 attorneys, and that was their whole thing from the get-go as well. It's like, why are these charges sticking? Why is this even coming up? How did this even get through to the grand jury? And so as they were continued to keep on asking those questions and kept on with that line of questioning, it is really ultimately what led to a mistrial. And we do think that the prosecution go to the mistrial because they really had nothing to offer that we had done anything wrong. We really believe it was a scare tactic just to try and get us to believe that something terrible was going to happen unless we made a plea deal with them, to show that something happened when nothing really happened.
Okay. Well, I can imagine a lot of listeners are thinking, well, something must have happened to have led to it to become to that degree. So what were the suspicions that even led to the accusation and then the being formally charged and arrested?
So I think that's where it comes in, where I took over a high school. It was called Austin High School, or is called Austin High School, home of the Mighty Panthers, and in El Paso, Texas, in a school that had many challenges at the time. And one of the biggest challenges with it was that it wasn't making the grade with No Child Left Behind with the state testing. And I had taken over the school at a point that if there had not been improvement with the school, there were going to be shutdown procedures for the school. I was very fortunate. This was a school that was in the neighborhood where I grew up. This was a school that I had many ties to, knowing many people who had gone there, and it was home. And so, with that affinity that I had for it, knowing many of the students when I got there, I knew the school was not in the bad shape that it was said to have. The reputation and the reality were different.
Mhm.
And just to put a long story short, we worked really, really hard. The students really got behind their school, and we improved. We didn't only improve a little bit over time, we improved significantly to a point that we were really doing some great things from a place where a school was hardly getting any kids going to any type of secondary education, either 2 or 4 year schools. To my last year there, we had 92% of the graduating class accepted to at least one 4 year university. We were getting kids accepted into MIT. We were getting kids accepted into Emory. We were getting kids accepted all over the country to just some really, really great places. We had Stanford on there. We had just West Point, and we were doing it with kids who came from poor socioeconomic backgrounds and kids of color. And we were taking a next giant step. And I think that really irritated some people.
Yeah, that was my, thinking. Most people would be very happy, very excited to see a school that, at least on the exterior, appeared to be struggling. And now it's moving in a very successful direction and empowering kids to go to higher education or trade school, whatever they choose to do, but empowering them to be in charge of their lives. Why would that irritate anyone?
Well, I think there's a narrative that's going on within the country and what is happening with the attack on public schools that we have. We're not allowed to believe in our conventional wisdom that our public schools are good schools. We're always being told that the American education system doesn't do a good job, that we don't do as well as our confreres over in Europe or elsewhere. And anybody who tries to say, no, our public school system really is good and we can really do something, that's kind of not allowed. And I do believe that there is there's a culture in the background, and I think politically, both on the left and the right, who want to tear down this system that we have and replace it with something else that doesn't cost as much for some, or I don't know what the full reasoning is. But I do know that when we were starting as a public school, showing we can do it with kids that we weren't supposed to be doing it with, but we were showing we could, it really got some of the politicians in El Paso really upset. One was named in particular Elliot Shapley, and he was a state senator in El Paso for the state of Texas. And instead of questioning me or asking me what did we do to make our school improve, what was going on, without ever meeting me, he goes into a public forum and says, well, you cheated.
Without any evidence?
Without any evidence, made up evidence.
Wow.
Made up evidence. I mean, it kind of reminds me of Trump trying to say that he's won the election and saying all this fraud exists and actually having no proof for it. That's exactly what this cheating scandal was. We have a very prominent politician who's saying cheating is happening, and he has absolutely no evidence, or what he is showing, that was the fraud.
What do you think was, and you might be speculating here, and I respect that, but what do you think may have been going on behind that? So that's his action. He's accusing you of fraud without any evidence, but what do you think was behind that reasoning?
What I really do think, and I think our book really points it out, and I think we have it well documented, is that we have a senator who was about to leave his public office, and I think he was looking at a way to make a cash cow for himself after he left. And I do believe he was trying to make a push to take over some of the public schools within our district, and that he would start running them, and that he would then be the administrator of grants going into those programs. And as the administrator of those grants, he would actually be getting a hefty salary from it.
I see. So back to following the money.
It was back to following the money, and that's what kept on coming up with our case, because we were definitely, I and the other defendants, we were definitely not the first targets of this cheating scandal that could really never take off. And I think what happened with it is they kept on throwing things until something was going to stick. And we had this senator who was just going to make it happen and used his clout to get the attention of the press, to get the attention of the TV stations, and even to get the attention of the courts. I mean, he really went a long way to make sure that there was going to be a cheating scandal no matter what. Even, and as we now know, after all was said and done, there was no cheating scandal.
So he eventually got the FBI involved. And
He
is that
did.
why the mail fraud came in? Okay. And now the retaliation against other people. I- Any
So,
evidence to that? What happened with there?
as they were not able to prove anything with cheating, they had to get something sexy for the grand jury to make it seem like we had done something. So they said that we retaliated against two teachers who were FBI informants. This was actually what led to the mistrial because of just how corrupt the prosecution and the FBI was in this. Here's the example of the main person that they had. He was a shop teacher. He was an auto shop teacher.
Okay.
And while I was principal of the school and while he was a teacher, he lost it. He was such a hothead one day that he actually tried to run over a student on purpose in the student parking lot. This was witnessed by other students. This was witnessed by a teacher. Uh, and when the district did their own investigation on it, they said, yes, he did this. This is absolute truth that he did this. They removed him from the campus. I was, of course, going for termination because how could you not?
Exactly.
So as we're going for that, this guy turned around, and I do believe he was directed by some people within the district who had already been working with the FBI. This guy turned around and says that the only reason I was getting rid of him was because I knew he was an FBI informant and I was retaliating against him.
Was he an informant?
He was an informant 7 days after he said I retaliated against him. So before he was ever an informant, he accused me of going after him because he was an informant. And what this turned into is that the FBI knew this. The main prosecutor, Deborah Kanoff, she knew it. She actually got disciplined for it. We have many people within the district, the interim superintendent, the head of employee services, the investigators. They all knew this outrageous lie that happened. The attorneys for the district, they all knew this outrageous lie was happening, and they kept their mouths shut.
That is crazy. And
It was crazy.
I used to be a teacher, and to hear about another teacher going off so much that you try to harm another student should certainly be, their action needs to be taken. For sure, action needs to be taken. And that's pretty hilarious that he became an informant after the fact, after his own accusation.
And yet it was a way to keep the cheating scandal going. They knew that if they presented this to the grand jury would say, wow, if they're retaliating against two teachers, there must be something to this cheating scandal.
Yeah, exactly.
It was all smoke and mirrors.
So it's great that the charges were eventually dropped. Now, you said at the beginning, as I recall, that no one felt that they had done anything wrong, but I thought I had read that at least two people had pled guilty.
3 people had actually pled guilty.
Okay.
There were 3 people who the FBI and DOJ, they had scared them so much. And let me kind of tell you about what they do to scare. When they took us and arrested us, they didn't just arrest us. They took us through the streets of El Paso in handcuffs. They did a perp walk on us as if we were murderers or drug dealers.
Mhm.
And it was a spectacle. You can still find it on YouTube. It was just really a whole spectacle. And when they read the charges out to us with the possible consequences that come from it in the prison time, mine was that I could have ended up with 60 years in federal prison.
Wow.
60 years, and they scared you with this. And was I scared? Of course I was scared.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's who's not going to be, and you're going 60 years for doing what? What did I do? And then it comes when they start doing the plea deals. Well, if you do this plea deal, here's a small probation fine that we're going to give you in 6 months of probation. So you're going, 60 years prison, 6 months of probation. So you have people taking those deals all the time. It's why the feds and the DOJ, they have a 98.2% conviction rate in this country. And that's because they scare people so much with these outrageous prison sentences that people who are completely innocent absolutely say, yeah, I'll do this instead of having to go to prison for something I didn't do. So we had three of people in this, all really good people, good educators, who all pled guilty so that they would not have these outrageous prison sentences. Two of them, one was a single mother, and they kept on telling her, you're going to be in prison. They're going to take away your child.
That's
You don't know you don't know who's going to be with your child. The other one, she was a grandmother, and she was a grandmother with two grandkids who were terminal. They were so sick, they were terminal, and this grandmother was the financial support to her grandkids, and also she was a babysitter. She did so many other things, and they're telling her, no, you won't be with your grandkids. You won't even be able to go to their funeral.
That is outrageous.
It was outrageous. So that was the only reason they pled guilty. And what happened with it was, after all this was over, and that after seeing that the case really was going to go nowhere, and that the five of us who remained as defendants were never going to acquiesce, they went to these three defendants without ever asking them and said, yeah, we're ready to withdraw your plea. You can withdraw your plea if you want, and there's not going to be any conviction on you.
How did the community rally support around you? I do know that I read that a lot of your former students were shocked, first of all, because they had nothing great but great things to say about you. And that the community came around for you. What did that look like?
So when they were first going through this, and this was a big cheating scandal of EPISD, and during this first round, it was in April of 2013, was the first time that they were trying to get rid of me and a few other administrators, and they were doing this at a board meeting. They made it very public. It was all over the news. They did it with this report that came from a forensic team. We were never allowed to see what the charges were against us until the public got to see it. I found out what this report said about me when I got to read about it in the El Paso Times. It was never told to me directly. So we were all being put up for termination within the district, and it was on April 2nd, 2013 was the day of the school board meeting to do this. And so on the day of that meeting, the school board meeting was packed. It was jam-packed inside. It only holds 350 people, but there were about 500 within that room. And then outside the boardroom, there were way more than what was actually inside the boardroom. Some of the estimates were that there were up to 2,000 people at this board meeting, to very, very clearly say, do not get rid of these administrators. And at least 75% of the support that was there was for me. It was my students, my parents, my teachers who came out to say what the school was like before I got there, what the school became while I was there, and some of the things that were happening that had really improved the school. So they came out and drove support for me, and it was humbling. I felt like George Bailey on It's a Wonderful Life. And what happened with that school board meeting is the school board members did not go with the recommendation that had been coming from others, and they all saved our jobs. And so we were all reinstated. I was kind of like this cause celebrity within El Paso. I couldn't even go to mass without being recognized. And I remember going up in line for communion, and people I didn't even know coming to me, congratulating me because of what had been going on. But it was after that, it was almost like winning that part and having that huge community support. It's got the people who were wanting this cheating scandal, it got them even angrier and more intent that they were going to get me, and they were going to get me in particular.
That's kind of funny, I have to say.
Yeah.
That part's kind of funny that they became even more angry because you had so much support coming around you, not just you, but the other educators as well. Now, I also had read that you were forced to resign. Was that after this was all over or in the midst of the process?
That was after this was all over. So after we had been reinstated, is when they really started focusing and changed their total focus and said, "Oh, you retaliated against these teachers." It's like, no, we didn't, but that's what they were focusing on.
Mm.
And so that's when it came to the focus of just me and my school. And what they did to try and coerce that and make that happen is they went to three of my assistant principals and they really tried hard. And I'm talking about two FBI agents. Two FBI agents went to three of my assistant principals and were trying their best to get them to say lies about me of what I was doing at the school, and they wouldn't do it. They
Hmm.
just absolutely wouldn't. One in particular, her name was Diane Thomas. And Diane Thomas goes, "I answer to a higher authority than you. I can't say this." They actually had a confession for her to sign that they had written 2 weeks before they had ever met her. And she refused to sign it. And when she refused to sign it, their words to her was, "You will see what happens to people who do not comply." And they ruined her life for it.
How did they do that?
So when they did that, she was fired from the district. She was her job was taken away. She was put on administrative leave. When she went to fight for her certificate, she lost that fight.
Mm.
And when they wanted her to go back, and they kept on telling her, "If you just say these things about Tanner, everything will be fine. Everything will be fine." She goes, "I can't lie." And she actually refused to go to one of the hearings for her license. She was going, "I'm done. These are kangaroo courts." And when that happened, they actually revoked her certification, and without her having any manner of getting it back. And she was she was willing to endure all of that. And after she endured it, I don't think she ever imagined. I never imagined that they were actually going to go after her with an indictment. Neither were the other two, Mark Tegmeyer, who also helped me write the book, and Nancy Love. They were also two other people that when the FBI went to speak to them on this, the FBI told them, "You say this stuff, you're going to keep your job, everything's going to be fine." And they had so much integrity, they go, "We're not going to lie about him. We're not going to do that. That's not open. That price is not there." They go, "Well, then you're going to be paying a big price." And they did. It's they also got indicted. They also lost their jobs. They also went through the perp walk. And there was never at one point, and we're all still friends today, there was never at one point that they were ever upset with me. They go, "No, this has been an affront to all of us, and an affront to education in general. They have just done something horrible." And it's amazing that we all stood together and we still stand together.
Now, the teacher who lost her license, was she able to regain her her sense of direction, or her license, or something of similar?
She has, hopefully there's going to be some point that we have some type of justice, because the rest of us, we did get our licenses back. We got our certifications back, and we got them back without blemish, as if we had done absolutely nothing wrong, because we hadn't done anything wrong. Uh, Diane, because she did her fight when she did it, and she didn't take some good legal advice of going about it. When she lost, and it's very hard to get back with what's called the Texas Education Agency, so that she would have a chance to fight for that again.
Hmm. Now, what's a strong takeaway that you would like listeners to take with them?
Uh, One is, and there's so many, but when I look at it in and make it succinct, it's to look at what we are doing with public education in our country, and to really question when people are saying that our education system isn't good, our K through 12 education, and really look at the history. We have had public education since 1636, since before we were a country. We don't give that up lightly. it has allowed us to have a middle class. It has allowed people who come from disadvantaged backgrounds to be able to have a quality education that gets them to a point that they are huge contributing members to our whole world. They become doctors, they become lawyers, they become teachers, they become businessmen. And without the public education that we have, we wouldn't have that type of literacy rate. When we look at, I ask people to really question when we are being compared to other countries, to ask more critical questions. What are we being compared on? What are the tests that are being used? Who's being tested? How are we evaluating these? And if we start doing that, we start seeing where we have apples to apples and apples to oranges. And we start seeing, I think, even more if we really start getting critical on it. I'm not saying that we don't have things to do to improve our public education system,
Absolutely.
but I will say that we have an incredible public education system that has done some amazing things. Bill and Melinda Gates, they do wonderful stuff with their education programs, and I only have one critique with them. They really put down our K through 12 public education program and talk about how behind it is and how much we need to improve it. There's some truth there, but I don't think it's as broken as they like us to believe, because in the same breath, they talk about our universities in this country, both private and public, and how great our universities are, because they're the best in the world. Well, with our great, wonderful universities, and we start looking at, well, who goes to our great, wonderful universities? It's our public school students. Our public school students from the U.S. are the majority of those who are in our best universities and colleges in this nation. And I just think that that's an important thing to look at. And it's an important thing to look at what is going on with our charter schools. Many people might be sending their kids to charter schools and might even be having a great experience with it. But charter schools overall don't fare as well as the public schools, at least not at this point. And when we look at what's happening with our charter schools, it's really another way to resegregate our schools again. Charter schools are becoming boutique little schools, and we're starting to get small schools in more elite areas where we're really getting private schools being financed at taxpayer expense.
Oh, now that's very interesting. And I'm a huge supporter of education, whether someone wants to go to private education or public education, since I worked in public education mostly. And you're right, education needs to be valued. Our kids need to be valued. They are a huge part of our society. They are going to be the ones leading the world, just like the previous generations grew up to lead the world. And it is important to have value for teachers, but really, just really importantly, the kids. And that's what you were working for. You were working to help these kids who sounded like they were struggling academically to really boost not only their scores, but their morale,
Absolutely.
their desire to achieve something, maybe assisting some to move out of depression or move out of despondency, to really see that they can do something different than what they've been doing, which is absolutely wonderful. Now, what is the name of your book?
The book is called Bombshell in the Barrio. And it comes from El Paso, and it comes from the main area where we believe that the politicians of, like I said, Elliot Shapley and some of the El Paso City Council, that they were focusing on neighborhoods really to do a land grab. They were out to discredit the schools in order to get rid of the schools, so that they would then, I think, be able to take over control of the revenue that was coming to the schools.
Yeah.
It's a pretty elaborate program, but actually something that we're not the first city that they did this to, or that a land grab through education was being done. They definitely had that in Atlanta as well.
And where can people buy your book?
The best place to buy it, or the easiest place, is on Amazon, and it's on Amazon and all you have to put is Bombshell in the Barrio. If you put in my name, it will also come up, John Tanner, but still Bombshell in the Barrio. And now Barnes & Noble is selling it. I was really surprised to see that. So Barnes & Noble has it going. If you order it from Barnes & Noble, they will get it to you. And The Barnes and Noble all over El Paso, they're all selling it, and so we're pretty happy about that.
That is fantastic. I'm very, very happy to hear of the really positive outcome from such a horrendous ordeal that you and the other educators had to go through. So wonderful that you were able to come out on the other side. Well, thank you, John, for joining me on Journey for Truth.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for letting us get this story out, and that we have another way of media finally letting our story come out, finally our side, and I appreciate that so much.
And thank you, listeners, also for joining me on Journey for Truth on iHeartRadio and YouTube and Spreaker. You can visit my website, empowermentthroughhealing.org. Until next time, have a fantastic week.